Now that the totally stock baseline dyno and the aftermarket catback dynos are done, we can take them and compare them to the Banzai thread. A couple things to note are they are two different dynos, so they're going to read different numbers. We don't expect to see the exact same numbers. One's a Mustang dyno, the other one is a Dynapack, so we don't expect to see identical numbers on them. Another factor would be the dyno conditions. I did my best to pull up the dyno conditions on the day of the Banzai dynos. I got a location fairly close to the dyno shop, and it looks to be about 20 degrees cooler on both dyno days when they did the initial dyno and the aftermarket catback dyno compared to the dyno conditions where I was at. So that would play a factor in the numbers as well. Dynos are essentially supposed to be just a tuning tool. Yes, people use them for bragging rights, but you get your car on there and you make adjustments, mainly when you have standalones. There isn't much tuning to be done on this type of car, but I'm using this as a tool to document expected changes for each part. So for those of you that are not familiar with the Banzai dyno thread, I'll post a link down in the description. The car that Banzai used was a pretty much bone stock 1995 PEP, which is a popular equipment package car. And that's important because in 1995 in the United States they got rid of the EGR, so that's actually fairly close to my car. JDM cars never came with an EGR, so they use the same intake manifolds. That's really the only difference between US cars from 93, 94, 95 is they remove the EGR, so you won't have that on the manifold. The only other difference that matters when it comes to making power with these is the pre-cat on the USDM cars, whereas JDM did not come with the pre-cat. The USDMs came with the pre-cat for emissions purposes. They are generally the first thing that people do as a reliability mod when it comes to FDs, because they hold in so much heat in the engine bay and they actually kill the turbos faster. That, you know, heat is a very bad thing. You can't get the heat out of the turbos fast enough. It damages all the rubber faster. So that's typically the first thing you remove if you have a bone stock RX-7, if you're knowledgeable with these things. That was the case with the Banzai thread. He had the car in the shop, if you read the thread, to fix a few boost leaks, a few other things. They removed the pre-cat and replaced it with the HKS downpipe. So in comparison between my car and that car, the only difference is the downpipe. Everything else should be pretty much the same. So unfortunately that wasn't a bone stock USDM car, because it would be pretty cool to see a difference between the USDM and the JDM car. So if there's anybody close to the Tampa area that has a totally 100% bone stock USDM car that's running properly and has the sequentials operating properly, it would be really cool if you could make it down to FD Auto and just get a baseline stock. That way we can compare my bone stock dyno of the JDM versus the bone stock USDM with the pre-cat and just see how much of a difference that pre-cat makes. I have a feeling it does make a pretty big difference, as you'll see as we go through the data from my findings just from this dyno. Let's get into what everybody likes talking about, the numbers, right? So the Banzai car put down a very respectable 254 horsepower and 222 foot-pounds of torque. My car put down 232 horsepower and 217 foot-pounds of torque. Now, like we mentioned before, two totally different dynos. They're going to measure differently. It's not what really matters in this situation. But as you can see, there's a lot larger gap between torque and horsepower in the Banzai car versus my car. There could be a few reasons for this, and I'm hoping future dyno sessions will confirm some of my hunches based around this. But we have to take into consideration the dyno conditions. If you remember, my day was extremely hot, 97 degrees, super high humidity, no airflow. And what that means is when the intercooler is heat soaked, even after we let it cool off, by the time the second turbo kicks in, that intercooler is no longer efficient. We don't have sufficient airflow over the intercooler to cool the charge both turbos put out. So by the time you reach redline, all you're doing is pumping a lot of hot air into the system. Another thing it could be is a boost leak. I personally don't think it's that, because we would have heard something on the dyno. All the couplers are new, all the vacuum lines are new, everything rubber in the system is new, and there's no indications that there's a boost leak on the car. We could have some Warren turbos, but again, that wouldn't make too much sense because we have almost identical torque numbers. The turbos are boosting as they should from the factory, so everything's operating the way they should. There's no odd noises, no strange leaks or anything like that. So I really don't think it's Warren turbos. Still a low mileage car. Like I mentioned before, the only difference between the two cars is the downpipe. The Banzai has the HKS downpipe, which is a 3-inch downpipe, whereas mine is a 2 1/4 inch. And that extra 3/4 of an inch diameter will make a large difference when it comes to flow out of turbos. If you look at Banzai's thread, he follows up and posts another dyno sheet of a similar car with about 37,000 miles, which is similar to the mileage on my car. And again, he got almost identical numbers to the car that he's testing all these parts on. That one got 255 horsepower, I believe. Before anybody says, oh, a downpipe can't make that much of a difference, I beg to differ. In my personal experience, downpipes are one of the single most effective ways to increase spool time, reliability, and flow from your turbos. And there are a lot of reasons for this, one of which comes to what I was explaining earlier about removing the stock pre-cat on the cars. Heat is a killer. Of course, if you have a cat on there with honeycomb, that's going to create back pressure. It's not going to let the turbos flow as much. So when you upgrade to like an HKS downpipe or even larger, all those hot exhaust gases are going to have the opportunity to expand pretty rapidly. And with expansion also comes cooling. So me personally, whenever I build cars, I always put the largest downpipe possible on the car, which is usually up to 4 inches on most cars. Even if you plan on running a 3-inch exhaust the rest of the way back, because you need that immediate expansion out of the turbos. And by the time it reaches the bottleneck, the exhaust gases have cooled enough to where you can flow the rest with 3 inches. Now this is mainly for the bolt-on cars. I know when you're running super high horsepower, we typically run 4-inch or larger all the way back. But this is just going on tuner cars from my personal experience.
The average gal is gonna get about that much, maybe this.
On my STI, I went from a 3-inch downpipe to the Turbo XS 4-inch downpipe, and I gained about 400 RPM of spool, no other changes in the car. Not to mention the butt dyno, I never had that one on an actual dyno. You can feel the power pretty much across the whole power band. It was able to hold more power for longer and spool up quicker. So in my eyes, that's a win, and that's one reason just to go with the 4-inch downpipe, even though some people say it's overkill. I personally tend to overbuild my stuff anyway. So if I build a 800 horsepower car, then I'm going to install parts that are going to support 1,000 or 1,200 horsepower because I don't want to be pushing things to the edge. Most aftermarket downpipes for FDs are about 3 inches. Some of them are 2 3/4 inches. You can get larger ones, 3.5, like the SMB. And then you have some of the cool JDM ones, Auto APEXi and Night Sports downpipes, which are a twin tube. You essentially have 2 tubes coming down off the turbos, and then they merge again, which is the direction I want to go. So if anybody knows of any Night Sports twin tube downpipes for sale in good condition, I'm trying to source them. I've been trying to source them for about 2 years. If I'm unable to get that, I probably will end up going with like a SMB 3.5 inch or something similar. There's a plethora of different downpipes for these things. So back to the dyno numbers. One of the reasons why I think the downpipe made the biggest difference in horsepower between these cars and the power band is because the catback made absolutely 0 difference on my car. So that means there's got to be a flow restriction, either due to the size of the downpipe not letting the gases expand like I explained, or the cat. So it is possible that my cat does not flow as well as that car's did and the other car. I don't see a reason why it wouldn't, because the car's low miles. When I pulled it down, the cat looks like it's totally intact, but that is still one possibility. Those cars in question could have had cats that were falling apart and had holes in them and possibly flowed more. I doubt it. I doubt that's the case. I'm still leaning on the downpipe being the cause of the increased horsepower. And I found another little piece of data comparing the dyno charts that kind of supports my idea. If you look at the Banzai dyno graph, that car peaked at 11.7 psi while mine peaked at 10.3. The factory RX-7s are supposed to have a 10, 8, 10 boost pattern, which mine is fitting. The Banzai car is essentially over boosting compared to what it should be from the factory. Those that modify RX-7s know that when you start opening up the exhaust, you start to get what's called boost creep. That's when you can't control the boost up in the higher RPMs, and that's what it looks like according to these dyno graphs, because down low we have essentially the same dyno graph in very similar torque numbers on the top end where there's more boost, which would account for the extra horsepower, and it's keeping that peak boost for longer, which is allowing the car to carry that power much further. So that pound and a half can make quite a difference with the car, and then compounding the lower boost levels with the heat-soaked intercooler would really explain why the numbers drop off, because you're not going to make nearly as much power with superheated air being used at high RPM in the combustion chamber. So we will be able to test these theories in the future with the dynos we'll be doing with the other parts. The next dyno I'm going to be doing is going to be with the auto APEXi intake and most likely some sort of ignition solution. If anybody has any plug and play ignition solutions they'd be willing to let me borrow, and we can just swap them out in the dyno, that we could have back-to-back comparisons of different igniters, that'd be great. I'd be happy to spend the dyno time just to do that type of experiment and then give our community the data to show real world changes that these parts make. As I said in the past, I'm not going to be using HKS twin power. Yes, you can still find them used, but I kind of wanted to concentrate on parts that are available today for these cars that people can still just get off the shelf. Aside from the Night Sports downpipe, but you can still get brand new downpipes, like I mentioned before, large, small, whatever you want that's going to fit that. So to me that's not as big of an issue, and I've always been a fan of the Night Sports downpipe and have been pretty much set on that. Adding the intake should not create boost creep, because that usually happens when you open up the exhaust, but it might create a little bit of boost spike, which you'll see a spike in boost, lower RPMs, but you won't see it creeping up over high RPMs like you do with the exhaust. So that's how we can kind of test our theory with these parts moving forward. We're going to do the intake. We might see boost spike. We shouldn't see any change in the top end unless it's a cooler day and we can kind of see how the hot air made the difference. I'm going to try to get a better fan to flow enough through the intercooler to support what we're doing and make it safer. And there's a possibility that adding an ignition upgrade will also clear up the top end. I have seen that in the past, but it's not going to help anything if you're just cramming a lot of hot air in there. Following up with the Banzai dyno, when they added their catback, they got a whopping 14 horsepower increase just by adding the catback. And they're both essentially the same size diameter. The dual end one they use does flow a lot more because it's a twin can system and it's a lot louder. I personally do not like that exhaust because it's incredibly loud. But at that point, the choke point should be the main cat. Now, if when I install my downpipe and we see the same characteristics, then we know that downpipe was a choke point on my initial dyno. I think what we'll find is downpipes on these cars is probably one of the best and safest modifications you could do on the car because of the heat reduction and flow you get out of them. I have personally never seen that large of a horsepower increase just by adding a catback to an RX-7. But in the past, we typically do the downpipe and the catback together, and I've never been part of doing something piece by piece like this, so I've never been able to analyze them to that extent. If you have any ideas, critique, discussion, just go ahead and post them in the comments. I'm open. Like I said, this is kind of an homage to that Banzai thread that those of us old-timers always referred to on RX7Club.com. But a lot of this younger generation or new people getting into RX-7s, they don't really support the forum. So you see them on Facebook groups. They want a lot more on-demand content. So that's one of the reasons why I'm making these videos, is to help the newer crowd getting into RX-7s upgrade their cars safely And what I'm going to be doing in the upcoming videos is going over some of the parts I'm considering and comparing the options for each upgrade. Different types of ignition sources, intercooler options, intakes, and the pros and cons of each one in my opinion. So let me know what you guys think about these videos. Please like, share, and subscribe like they say on YouTube. I'm doing this for the community and the fellow future FD owners.